The music was already playing. White chairs lined the grass. Guests were standing. Phones were raised. And my future son-in-law was smiling like a man who had already counted his winnings. That's when my daughter reached into her bouquet. Her fingers trembled. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and pressed it into my palm as we stood there in front of everyone. I opened it. 3 words. Dad, stop this. Before I tell you how a man tried to steal my daughter's future and lost everything in front of 180 wedding guests, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe underestimating a quiet man who has nothing left to prove is one of the most expensive mistakes someone can make, hit that subscribe button, because this story doesn't start at the wedding. It starts months earlier, with a feeling I couldn't explain, and a mistake I almost didn't survive. I'm Daniel Mercer. I'm 62 years old, retired, and I've lived on the same piece of land just outside Asheville, North Carolina for nearly 3 decades. 1 farmhouse, 1 long gravel driveway, a stretch of land most people would call quiet, peaceful, boring. Lucas Vaughn noticed at the moment he stepped out of his car. Not the house, not the view, the land. I saw it in his eyes before he ever asked a single question. This land was never supposed to be impressive. My wife and I bought it when Asheville was still considered too far out. Back when people laughed at the idea of living 20 minutes from town. We raised our daughter here. Planted trees that took decades to mature. Built a life that didn't need explaining. After my wife passed, the house got quieter. Not empty, just hollow in places. Grief doesn't announce itself. It sneaks up when you're folding laundry alone, when you set the table out of habit and realize there's 1 plate too many. Emily started coming by every weekend after that. She said she wanted to check on me. I knew the truth. She was afraid silence might swallow me. Emily has always been like her mother, open, trusting, assuming the best in people, even when it costs her. She grew up believing that honesty eventually wins. I grew up learning that honesty without awareness gets exploited. That difference would almost tear us apart. But at the time, all I saw was my daughter smiling again. That smile returned the day she brought Lucas Vaughn home. Lucas arrived in a charcoal gray luxury sedan that looked freshly detailed, not flashy, calculated. He stepped out wearing casual clothes that were just a little too perfect, like they'd been chosen by someone who wanted to look effortless. Firm handshake, steady eye contact, complimented the house, complimented Emily, complimented me. That was the first red flag. Men like Lucas don't compliment without a reason. At dinner, he asked the right questions. Where I'd worked, when I retired, how long we'd owned the land. Nothing aggressive, nothing obvious. But I noticed something most people miss. He didn't listen for stories. He listened for numbers. When I said a long time, his eyes narrowed slightly. When I said we managed, he nodded like he just solved part of a puzzle. And when I mentioned I handled most repairs myself, that's when he smiled, not impressed, reassured. Later that night, we stood on the porch. Fireflies drifted through the yard. The trees hummed with cicadas. Lucas leaned against the railing, coffee in hand. Casual. So where exactly does your property end, Daniel? I pointed vaguely toward the tree line. He nodded, filed it away. That question would come back again, and again, and again. I didn't say anything to Emily at first. How could I? Your boyfriend feels off isn't evidence. It's paranoia, especially from an older father watching his daughter move on. And I didn't want to be that man, the controlling father, the bitter widower, the obstacle to her happiness. So I stayed quiet. And Lucas mistook my silence for ignorance. For months later, Emily called me breathless. Dad, he proposed. She said yes before he finished the sentence. I congratulated her. I meant it, but something in my chest tightened. Because 4 months isn't love. It's momentum. Once the wedding planning started, Lucas's tone shifted. Not in front of Emily. Never in front of her. But with me, he grew practical. Estate planning is important. Long-term care costs are no joke. You don't want Emily worrying about this stuff later. Each sentence was wrapped in concern. Each one pointed toward control. I felt small in those moments. Not weak, underestimated. Like a man being measured for a box he wasn't ready to climb into. Here's the truth no one talks about. When you're a father, protecting your child sometimes means waiting. Waiting while something feels wrong. Waiting while you gather proof. Waiting while your silence gets mistaken for blindness. Every instinct in me screamed to pull Emily aside, to warn her. But fear is louder than reason when love is involved. And I knew without proof I'd lose her trust forever. So I swallowed it, and I watched. Lucas never raised his voice. Never slipped. That's what made it terrifying. Because men who plan don't rush. They observe. They wait. And they count on being underestimated. Just like he underestimated me. There's a specific kind of fear that doesn't make your heart race. It doesn't make your hands shake. It makes you very, very still. That's the fear I felt the first time Lucas Vaughn spoke to me like I was already fading. We were standing in my study, the same room where I'd balanced budgets, raised a child, and signed the paperwork that gave my wife and me this life. Afternoon light spilled through the window, dust floating lazily in the air. Lucas sat across from me, legs crossed, perfectly relaxed, and he smiled with pity. "You've done well for yourself, Daniel," he said, tapping the edge of my desk with a finger. "But you don't want all this to become overwhelming." Overwhelming. He said it like a diagnosis, not a suggestion. I felt heat crawl up my neck, but I didn't move, didn't react, because reacting would tell him he was close. Instead, I nodded slowly. "You're probably right." That was the moment he decided I was manageable. Men like Lucas don't need dominance. They need permission. And I had just given him a sliver of it. After that conversation, the visits increased. He didn't announce them. He just showed up, sometimes with Emily, sometimes alone. He'd walk the property like he was memorizing it, counting steps, noting slopes, watching how the land opened up beyond the tree line. One afternoon, I caught him standing near the fence. Phone pressed his ear. "Prime land," he said quietly. "Old guy, no protection." "Yeah, I'm sure." He noticed me watching and smiled like nothing had happened. I smiled back, but inside, something cold settled into place. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house creaked the way it always did. Familiar sounds, comforting sounds. But they felt different now, like reminders of how alone I was. If something happened to me, if I slipped, if I fell, no one would know for hours, maybe days. I realized then that Lucas wasn't just planning. He was waiting. The next morning, I called Ruth Calder. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but she answered on the second ring. "You sound tired," she said. "I need you to listen," I replied. I told her everything, not just what Lucas said, but how he said it, what he didn't say, the pauses, the assumptions. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Daniel," she said, "this isn't about estate planning." I closed my eyes. "I know. He's positioning himself," she continued. "And people like him don't position unless there's an end game." "What kind of end game?" I asked. "The kind where you lose control of your life without realizing when it happened." Ruth brought in a private investigator, a woman named Janice Hale. Professional, quiet, sharp-eyed. She didn't promise results. She promised truth. Within a week, she had patterns. Not crimes. Patterns. 2 prior engagements. Both with women whose families owned land companies or large portfolios. Both ended quietly. Both ended before marriage. No lawsuits. No drama. Just silence. People like this, Janice told me, don't get caught because they don't rush. I felt sick. This wasn't his first attempt. I wasn't special. I was just next. Every time Emily called, my stomach tightened. She talked about seating charts, flowers, music, normal wedding things. And every word felt like a betrayal, not by her, but of her, because I knew something she didn't, and I was letting her walk toward it. I'd stand in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, nodding, smiling, pretending. When the call ended, I'd grip the counter until my knuckles went white. This is what fear looks like when you're a parent. Not panic. Patience. As the wedding approached, Lucas grew bolder. He started framing his control as responsibility. You shouldn't have to worry about paperwork anymore, he said one afternoon. I can handle it. That's what family does. Family. The word made my skin crawl. He slid a folder across the desk. Power of attorney. Medical proxy. Trust amendments. Just in case, he said again. Just in case you stop being useful. I studied the papers carefully. Then I asked a question that made his eyebrows lift. And if I decide I don't want to sign these? His smile didn't falter. Well, he said calmly, that would be short-sighted. Not angry, not threatening. Certain. That was when I knew. He wasn't worried about my consent. He was planning for its absence. Janice called me late one evening. Daniel, she said, I got something. It wasn't video. It was audio. A conversation Lucas thought no one would ever hear. He laughed. Mocked me. Mocked Emily. She's sweet, he said. Not bright. She won't notice until it's done. My hands trembled for the first time. Not from fear. From rage. But rage is useless unless you control it. So I did the hardest thing imaginable. I did nothing. This is the part people judge. Why didn't you tell her? Why didn't you stop it sooner? Because love doesn't listen to warnings. It listens to truth. And truth has to be discovered, not delivered like an accusation. The morning of the wedding didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like standing on the edge of something tall, staring down, knowing it'll fall, but not knowing how much it's going to hurt. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor in soft, golden rectangles. The kind of morning people describe as perfect. The kind that gets photographed and remembered fondly. I stood at the counter, holding a mug of coffee I hadn't touched. My hands were steady. My stomach was not. Outside, caterers unloaded trays. Chairs scraped against the lawn as they were arranged in neat rows. Laughter drifted in from the distance. Friends arriving early, already celebrating something that hadn't happened yet. The house smelled like flowers. And grief. Because my wife should have been there. And because I knew, deep down, that my daughter was about to lose something today. Even if we did everything right. Emily came down the stairs just after 8. She wasn't in her dress yet. Just a white robe, hair pinned loosely, makeup half done. She looked fragile in a way that had nothing to do with nerves. She stopped when she saw me. Just stopped, like she was trying to decide whether to run or stay still. Dad, she said quietly. I turned toward her. Yes, sweetheart. She took a breath. Then another. Her hands were shaking. Do you ever get that feeling, she asked, that something is wrong, but if you say it out loud, it becomes real? There it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. The moment I was terrified of. I walked toward her slowly, careful not to spook her, like someone approaching a wounded animal. Yes, I said. I know that feeling. She swallowed hard. I keep thinking I'm imagining things. That I'm just scared because this is big. Because it's permanent. I wanted to tell her everything. God, I want to tell her everything. But this wasn't my moment. This was hers. So I said the only thing that wouldn't push her away. Trust yourself, I said softly. Whatever you feel, you're allowed to feel it. Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded and turned away. Lucas arrived shortly after. He was flawless. Suit pressed, shoes polished, hair perfect. He walked like a man stepping into a future he'd already rehearsed. When he saw me, he smiled wide and clapped me on the shoulder. Big day, he said. His grip lingered just a second too long. Life-changing, he added. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see a threat. I saw a man standing on a trapdoor he didn't know existed. Yes, I said evenly. It is... He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. After today, things will be simpler for you. Simpler. The word landed like a knife. He thought he was reassuring me. He was promising me erasure. Guests took their seats. Music floated through the air. The mountains stood quietly in the distance, indifferent to human drama. When Emily appeared at the top of the aisle in her wedding dress, the world seemed to pause. She was radiant, not glowing. Radiant, like something precious that didn't yet know it was in danger. She took my arm. Her grip was tight, too tight. I felt her pulse racing through her fingers. "You okay?" I whispered. She nodded. She didn't believe it. We started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. The officiant smiled warmly. He spoke about love, commitment, trust, words that meant everything. Words Lucas had been using as camouflage for months. Lucas stood across from us, hands clasped, smiling with the calm assurance of a man who thought every variable was under control. I could see it in his eyes. He thought the game was over, that all that remained was paperwork and patience. As we reached the altar, Emily's breathing changed. Short, sharp, her hand slipped from my arm and moved to her bouquet. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she pulled something free, a folded piece of paper. She pressed it into my hand without looking at it. Her fingers were ice cold. Our eyes met. Hers were wide. Wet, terrified, I unfolded the note. 3 words. Dad, stop this. Something inside my chest broke open. Not loudly, cleanly, like a bone snapping under pressure that had carried too long. I stepped forward. Stop. 1 word. It cut through the ceremony like a gunshot. The music died mid-note. The officiant froze. Guests murmured, confused. Lucas turned, his smile faltering for the first time. "Daniel," he said, laughing softly. "What's going on?" Emily let go of my arm. Her hands were shaking. "I can't do this," she said. Lucas laughed again, sharper this time. "Nerves," he said. "This is normal." She shook her head. "No," she said. "It's not." Her voice trembled at first, but then something changed. She straightened, lifted her chin. "I heard you," she said. Lucas stiffened. "Heard what?" he asked. "You talking about my dad," she said. The crowd went still, completely still. Lucas's smile collapsed. "That's ridiculous." "You said once you had power of attorney, it would be easy," Emily said. Weeks passed. Therapy helped. Time helped. She stayed at the house. We planted flowers where pain had been. Lucas faded into a cautionary tale. Final reflection. What revenge really is. Here's the truth. Revenge isn't rage. It isn't cruelty. It's restoring balance without losing yourself. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands up and says, "No." If this story stayed with you, hit like. Tell me in the comments. What's the most satisfying moment of justice you've ever seen? And subscribe for more true stories where patience, intelligence, and love win in the end. Because the quiet ones, we're never as powerless as we look.